Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. My name is Louis, and today we're going to be discussing the move 7 sidelines that white can choose after we enter the Richter-Rauzer. So we're going to enter the Classical Sicilian via e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c d4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, and knight c6. And after bishop g5, in the previous video we discussed the move bishop d7, queen b6, and a6, which aren't very good moves, but they're there. But I still believe that e6 here is the best move, trying to enter the mainline stuff. So for example, after like queen e2, a6, castles, bishop d7, white can choose, like, for example, this kind of position with knight f3 and goes into a lot of complications. Or like instead of f4, obviously they can also go f3. But we're not going to be discussing the main line in this video. We're going to be discussing that in the 8th video in this series. But in this video, I'm going to take the time to discuss the move 7 alternatives that white can choose in this position after e6. So there are many moves. First off, knight c6. There's also the move f3 here. There's also the early f4. There's also the move queen d3, which I think is a very good option. I've also tried it myself. It's quite reasonable. And there's also the move bishop b5 here. So first off, we're gonna get away. We're gonna discuss and get rid of the simpler moves. So first off, knight takes e6. This looks kind of reasonable at first glance, because if we're given the chance to play bishop d7 and then take on c6 with the bishop, for example, then maybe it kind of seems logical to supposedly damage black structure with this move. But in retrospect, after b takes e6 here, we notice that eventually we can make the advance d5 after kicking this bishop away, and we're gonna have massive center here, and we're gonna have the open b file, and I think we're gonna be more than happy here. So for example, e5. This was the original idea by Kurt Richter. So one of the inventors basically of the Richter-Rauzer, basically trying to sack a pawn here and just claim that this double pawn later, if we take, is going to be weakness. But this has been known to be bad, simply because of the move queen a5 here. And after, for example, bishop f6, so we're obviously in this position pressuring this bishop. So if they take on f6 with a pawn, then we can take on g5. And if white is forced to do this, okay, maybe not this, but queen g7 first. We're still defending the d6 pawn, and we're going to get a massive center with d5 at some point. And we're going to be very happy here. There's also no material imbalance. So if they don't go for e takes f6, then if they go for bishop f6, then after gf6, e takes d6, for example, we can play the move rook b8 here. And this goes into a bit of complex territory, for example, after queen f3, but we should be fine here with rook takes b2, and for example, queen c6. Okay, noting that queen f6 here loses due to rook c2, and we're gonna take this knight next with like possible of discover checks, so we're gonna be winning that position. But in here, if queen takes e6 with check, then we can just simply go bishop d7, queen a8, and the move queen d8 here. And we can see that this pawn is eventually going to fall if white trades the queens, and we're going to be very happy. So if they go for queen takes a7, then we can still go for bishop d6, knight e4, and then we can play the move bishop c6 here. So this is kind of not very intuitive, so I think it's important to learn these lines. And so after the move castles here, we can actually get to a very forcing line. So notice that our bishop here is being attacked, and it's also pinned, and also our rook is hanging. So we're gonna need to find the correct move here, which is rook takes c2. So a rook sacrifice, king c2, and bishop takes e4. And supposedly with best play after king b3, this is going to lead to a draw, or at least it's gonna lead to a complex position where at the very end we should at least be having an equal position here. We are down like an exchange here, but I guess we can see that this king on b3 isn't very happy. We're going to castle next, and with these, at least with the compensation of the bishop pair, we should be quite happy. But if they play any other move besides king b3, for example, bishop d3, which looks logical at first glance, even the engine thinks that it's okay. But after the very strong queen c8, suddenly the engine sees that this is completely losing for yeah, for white. So for example, if king b1, then simply queen c4 here, bishop e4 and queen takes c4, king b2, and we can even give a bishop e5 check, and we're going to castle next, and our pieces are simply going to be too active there, with even like rook b8 coming. And so that's simply going to be losing. And if they play queen d2, king d2, then we have the move bishop b4 check, king e2, bishop takes d3, king takes d3, because if rook takes d3, then there's this check over here. For example, rook d3, queen c2, king e3, and bishop c5 is just winning. And so after king takes d3, we can simply castle here, and I think if we play accurately, we're going to be able to win this game quite easily. Yeah, there are more than one winning moves after this. So we're going to be happy with that. So yeah, that basically covers the knight c6 and e5 idea. And otherwise, if white doesn't do anything, then we're possibly just going to play bishop e7, h6, kick the bishop away with tempo, and then we can at some point play either d5 or e5, and we're going to be quite happy. So that covers knight takes e6. The next move is f3. So here it's possible to like okay, after e6 and queen d2, we can definitely like transpose to the mainline stuff with bishop d7, castles, and then the important move knight takes d4, which was recommended by Sam Shanklin, and I think other players such as like Koryakin and or Grishuk, if I'm not mistaken, have employed this. We can even see Carlsen, Firuza, Caruana, yeah, and very high level players there. And we can enter the main line, but basically so after f3 we can enter the main line. I think it's quite reasonable, which we'll discuss in the 8th video, as I've mentioned before. But in here, the move f4 is somewhat inaccurate, because okay, if white wants to play like queen d2, castles, and then f4, that is quite reasonable and is like basically the main line of the Richter-Rauzer. But if they play f4 immediately, then we have the resource of playing h6. And if they go for bishop h4, then we can play bishop e7. Noting that white cannot play queen d2, because queen d2 runs into knight e4, and we're going to be winning a pawn here at the very least. For example, bishop e7, knight d2, bishop d8, knight f1, or knight d4 are both fine, I think. And after rook f1, knight d4, we're threatening this guy, and for example castles, and we can even go knight f5 or yeah, this is all fine, I think. And like we're gonna go rook d8, and we're gonna be up a pawn there. So queen d2 doesn't work, and so the only reasonable option is to maybe like go for bishop queen d3, after which we can go for e5. For example, knight c6, bc6, fe5, de5, queen d8, bishop d8, bishop c4, and a move that I really like in this position is the move king e7. So we want to try to chance this bishop with bishop e6, and if we get our king active on the e6 square, then we're going to be quite happy here. Noting that also this pawn on c6 restricts the knight from going to b5 and d5, and I think we're quite happy in this position. So yeah, so that covers the f4 move. But okay, maybe there's also one more move, which is bishop f6. But after queen f6, for example, okay, knight db5 runs into maybe queen d8, and later we get a6 and d5 with tempo, so we're going to be quite happy here. But if they go for knight c6, then we can play bc6, and after queen d2, we can play d5 here. And now we're opening up the bishops. We have ideas of like bishop b4, and we also have our fair share of we have our fair share of pawns in the center, and I think we should be better here, as Stockfish says here. So yeah, that's not very challenging. And so f4 there is not very good either. What if they go for bishop e2? Just a calm move here. I think that we can just go for bishop e7, and for example castles, we can castle, and this setup is not very challenging. If they go for f4, then it runs into queen b6, and we're just winning a piece here. If they go for king h1, trying to go for f4, then we can play knight d4, which is apparently a novelty in this database, queen d4, And we should be fine here with like bishop d7, try to go to c6. We can even try to go for a6 and rook c8. Maybe even like, yeah, any of those ideas I combine together, it should be completely fine here. I don't think black has any problems. And also bishop f6, then I'm assuming that, yeah, we can just take on f6. And they can take the pawn here, but we can just break open this this pawn structure, and we're gonna have one less pawn island here. I think bishop c6 is completely fine, or we can target even with bishop a4. And yeah, we should be quite happy here. Okay, so that covers this king h1 move. The next move is maybe bishop e3, which is the second most played move. So yeah, in this position we can just maybe play the calm move bishop d7, and after f4 we can even go for queen c7 here. And for example, knight b3, a6, we want to go for b5, a4, preventing it. And an interesting move that was discussed, I think, in Yermolinsky's book was knight a5 here. Trying to head to c4, for example. And if knight takes a5, then we're going to be quite happy with queen a5, queen d2, rook f e8, protecting e7. And we're anticipating, like, for example, if knight d5 comes. So a move ago, if we played a move like rook f d8, which I think is careless, knight d5 here, white can at least take the bishop pair and like weaken the support over the d6 pawn here. So I don't think that's very good. And so rook f e8 here is important. And king h1, bishop c6, and I don't see any reason as to why black would be any worse in this position. For example, we can just follow game here by between Ponomarev and Mamedyarov. Bishop d3, rook a c8, rook f b1, trying to go for b4, which is logical. Then after queen c7 and b4, we have the move d5 here. Yeah, d5 in this position. And for example, okay, if e5, then we can plan a knight on e4. And once we get this break in, we should be quite happy actually. So yeah, I think we don't need to proceed from here. We can see that the setup is quite nice. Okay, and so that covers basically this bishop e2 move. Then and the maybe the two most serious options here are the moves queen d3, which has been chosen by neural networks recently, which shows the strength of this move, and we shouldn't take this move lightly. The idea being that white maybe wants to place the queen on g3 to try to pressure the d6 pawn, and at some point, if we're careless, then white can simply be threatening e5 with the, for example, once white has castled and like putting pressure on the d file with our queen on d8, it might get a little dangerous, as we can see later. And so, for example, a move like a6 is just careless because it allows knight c6, bc6, castles, bishop e7, for example, and queen g3. And suddenly we're hit with this uncomfortable pressure. E5 is going to come eventually, and we should be worse in these lines. And so we don't want to play a6 here. We should just go for bishop e7. And for example, if they go for bishop e2, and okay, this is maybe I've talked about this in the previous video about Sergei Kudrin's idea of like bishop e2 and rook d1, which is interesting, but we can simply castle here, and after, for example, rook d1, we can take on d4, queen d4, and go like bishop d7. We should be fine here with like bishop c6 or a6 b5. Yeah, or other options are include like maybe the move d5 here, e d5, knight d5, bishop e7, queen e7, knight d5, e d5. And the e-file pin here provides some counterplay for black. For example, knight c6 and bc6. We're not even gonna get an Isolani, and we should have like rook e8 coming, and like bishop e6 maybe just to solidify the position, and we should be fine here. So those are two possibilities. We can either go for knight d4 or d5 here, or h6 is also reasonable. Yeah, but maybe h6 runs into the idea of bishop c1, that being one of the ideas of like Sergei Kudrin's idea of bishop e2 and rook d1, being that you want to free this rook on a1 first before you can try to retreat with the bishop, and this maybe goes into complications that I'm not too well versed on, so we're just going to skip this idea and proceed to the next line. So after bishop e7, white can castle, which I think is the most logical castles, and f4 here is maybe the most common move. So if we notice this position, and if we compare it with like if we imagine this queen was on d2, then it would basically be like close to maybe the old main line of the Richter-Rauzer. So yeah, I'm not gonna go into that because that's gonna be in another video again. But we can see that after f4, the queen still has potential to go on g3. But one main difference, is that with the queen on d3 here, we can possibly play the move rook d8, for example, after the move queen b6 here, which was recommended by Sam Shankland. And after, for example, knight db5, then we can immediately play the rook to d8, and we should be more or less fine here. For example, queen g3, knight e8, bishop e7, knight e7, and bishop c4, just played once in 2007, as we see here. And queen c5 was played in the game, but I think a simple move like knight c6 should be sufficient here. The idea being that we want to prevent the knight from going back to d4 because it may be annoying. It can go like to f3 and g5. And so once we play knight c6, now we want to play a6 and possibly move the queen away to play b5. And so, for example, queen d3 was what I found. And after a6, okay, we can play bishop d7 here. I think it's maybe what I would play in a real game. But even something as simple as like queen d4 and like trading all the pieces down here and going for b5, I mean, this shouldn't be that bad of an endgame here. And we also need to notice that white wants to play a4 here, and if we allow it freely, then we're going to be worse. So we need to play the move rook db8, and after a4, for example, bishop c6. Okay, this goes into like more complicated lines, but at the very end of it, we should be just about okay here. And for example, e5 was recommended by the engine, but we can simply trade here and go d5. I don't see how black is like clearly worse here with rook c4 coming. For example, the engine will eventually calm down with like f5, rook c4, bc4, and black's pawn structure seems to be okay here. As far as I can see, king e7 is going to come, and black doesn't really have any major weaknesses, so I think this should be holdable. So going back here, instead of after queen b6, instead of knight d to b5, we can see knight c6, and after bc6 and e5. The key point being that we can see in this position, the difference between queen d3 and queen d2 is that once the queen is on d3, we can harass it with d takes e5, f takes e5, and the move rook d8. If the queen is on d2, then bishop d3 would be a convenient reply, where we're just simply losing here with too much pressure on this pin. So we can get away with it in this position because of rook d8. And after, for example, queen f3, rook d1, knight d1, knight d5, h4, bishop a6, c4, queen c5. Yeah, this is one of the lines recommended in, again, Shankland's course, but I don't want to plagiarize his hard work, so I do recommend going into these lines after buying his course, for example. It goes into a lot of complications and many variations, and the BGN of this of the file in this video's description will not include any of his lines included in his like full course. I'll maybe only include like some of it from the short and sweet course, which is free. So yeah, just keeping that in mind. So one more critical line here is after the move queen d3 on move 7. There is this line after bishop e7, castles, and the move queen g3 here, which I think looks dangerous at first glance. But something that Shankland recommends, again, this is like basically going to be promoting a lot of Shankland's lines because I truly believe in them. For example, knight d4, rook d4, and e5. There's a move rook b4 and rook d1, which was covered in the course, and I recommend researching, buying his course and researching through that. Though I'm not going to include it in the PGN in the video's description for obvious reasons. So yeah, that's basically going to cover the queen d3 line. And the next move is maybe bishop b5, which is quite an old move. It was first implemented, I think, or maybe popularly implemented in the game Udesin versus Shirov in the 1993 interzonal Biel interzonal. Udesin was in basically a must-win situation, and he managed to win this game against Shirov with the white pieces. Shirov holding the black pieces, obviously. And in here, white is simply threatening knight c6, so we need to deal with that with a move like bishop d7. If we play the move queen b6 here, something like bishop e3, and for example queen c7, this should be fine. And something that we can notice about this position is that this is similar to like a lot of Scheveningen type positions. But the key difference is that the bishop is already on b5, meaning that there is no possibility of planting the knight on b5, and we can also get a tempo with a6 and b5 here, noting that the bishop is already on b5. But the main problem that I found with this position is maybe the move g4 here, which goes into quite serious complications, but it should be fine by the end of it. So like for example h6, h4, and by the end of it we should be okay, but personally I don't really like being attacked in this way, so I didn't go too much in depth into it. But just noting that this is an alternative to play queen b6. But noting that queen b6 also allows bishop f6, so maybe it's not everyone's cup of tea. So queen b6 is possible, but the main move here is bishop d7. And okay, bishop c6 has been tried many times. We can see here Udesin tried it against Shirov, and after bc6, queen f3 being the idea, threatening to play e5 here and wrecking open, like breaking black's pawn structure and just taking the c6 pawn. And so it's very important here to play the move h6 to kick the bishop away. And yeah, white has no time to play e5 here, obviously. So for example, bishop f6, then we can play queen f6, and we should be quite happy here with like queen f3, knight f3, and e5 here, taking away the d4 square from the knight. And so we have the bishop here. We have good potential here with like bishop e6. Just standard like classical Sicilian ideas with like e5, trying to push the pawn. Bishop e7, we can castle, and we should be doing quite well. So if bishop f6 is not so appealing, then bishop h4 is basically the only reasonable move. And here it's possible to play the move e5, which I think I really like, just preventing white from playing e5 themselves. So yeah, in this position, knight b3, it's quite dubious because we can play the move a5 immediately. Standard idea once the knight is on b3, just to harass this knight. And if a4 is played, then we'll be very happy with bishop e7. And once we get like g5 and bishop e6 in, the weaknesses on like the b4 square and this whole queen side will be quite noticeable. So we're not afraid of that. And if they play like a move like knight d2, just getting out of a4, then I think, yeah, a simple move like bishop e6 preventing knight c4, and like we can go bishop e7 and we can possibly castle. We should be quite happy here. Also rook b8 is coming. So yeah, and in this position, if not for knight b3, then knight f5 can come, after which we can take on f5. Okay, e takes f5 runs into d5, so queen f5, and here we can play the move queen d7, I think. Noting that if black, or rather if white takes on here, then we can take with the knight, and this bishop is not going to be happy. For example, we can push g5 and it's not going to be happy on g3, so we're going to be okay here. There's also obviously the calmer move bishop e7, but I mean this is just different alternatives that you can choose. But basically we can see that black does not have like any serious problems in these lines. So yeah, that covers the bishop c6 move. Another serious option is the move queen d3 here. The idea being same as like the immediate queen d3 on move 7, being that white wants to play the move queen g3 and kind of annoy us on the king side. So here we can play the move h6, just kicking the bishop away, which I think is maybe a more solid alternative than what Sam Shankland recommends in the course. He recommends the move bishop e7, for example, after castles and knight d4, and we get into this kind of position with queen b6, which is what he recommended. But this goes into a lot of complications after like either rook h1, f4, or queen g7. They're all like possible moves here, and they need to be taken seriously. And so I'm not going to go into that again. And so what I recommend is just in playing the immediate move h6, and after bishop h4 we can play bishop e7, and this position has been seen a couple of times. One key resource that I use to understand this position better is that in a video by Chessbase India, Surya Shekhar Ganguly, a grandmaster from India, explained that the idea behind White's rationale in this position is that White does not want to allow Black to play the move g5 and knight e5 simultaneously or like in succession. So if we play the move g5 here, okay, I mean after castles, then if we play the move g5 here, then White is possibly just going to take on c6 here with the bishop, and after bc6, bishop g3, now we can note that this d6 pawn is a weakness, and we don't want to push it because it's going to be seriously weakened. And there's like ideas of e5, and yeah, this is quite comfortable for White. And so here, and if we play knight e5 here, then White can play the move queen h3, noting that g5 loses to bishop g5, just winning a pawn because of this deadly pin on the h-file. And we can see that White is quite comfortable here. I don't see any problems for White, rather White is like the one pressing in this position. And so instead of g5 or knight e5, we can simply castle here. And after, for example, bishop c6, bc6, and knight b3, we can just simply play a5. And okay, we should be fine here after like bishop f6 and gf6. This was played by Katerina Lagno against Yermolinsky, if I'm not mistaken, in 2019. And after queen g3, which was played in the game, king h7 and rook d6 was played. Yermolinsky erred with the move bishop d6. Rather, they should have played the move rook g8 first, kicking the queen out of this square, and after queen d3, only then take on d6. And after queen d6 and bishop c8, White does not want to take on c6 because of rook a6, and we have a lot of play there. And so we're going to be better here, basically. We're just up in exchange for a pawn, and it's not like White's minor pieces are that amazing. And instead of queen g3 in this position, there's also the move knight c5 recommended by the engine. After which we can just simply play like bishop c8, and I don't see how Black is like seriously worse here. There's no serious attack gonna come this way because like this diagonal is not very tender, and we can play the moves next: queen c7, rook b8, and at some point we can push e5. Noting that like for example, if the rook comes to d3, trying to swing over to like h3 for example, once you play e5, that option is taken away, and we've already closed off the diagonal, fixing this pawn on e4. We should be quite fine here, and there's no serious attack gonna come basically, and we should be fine. Yeah. So that's what I recommend playing, though it's still very complicated obviously. Also, one more line to note is in this position after bishop b5 and bishop d7 and queen d3, instead of playing the move h6 and like bishop h4 and then only then going for bishop e7, and like after castles we can play castles. There's also the option here just to immediately play bishop e7. And one maybe two lines here to note is that bishop c6 and bc6 is possible, but I don't think it's quite good for White because after castles long, I think that we need to include the move h6 here. The idea being that we want to free the h7 square, and once we play d5 and e5 comes, we can play the move knight h7. So for example, after bishop h4, d5, e5, and knight h7, and we're gonna be quite happy here. For example, if knight b3 comes, now we have the timely c5 move, and I think that Black's initiative here is too strong. We have the open b file. We're going to be launching an incredibly strong attack. We're quite happy here. And comparing this position, for example, if we didn't play h6, like for example, if we play d5 here, then after e5, knight g8 is maybe forced, bishop e7 and knight e7, there's the move knight b3 here, and suddenly the c5 square is very much under control. White can try to find queen d4 and f4, and like plant a knight on c5, and white is going to be simply strategically winning there. So yeah, that's going to be the additional line. And in here, if they castle, then we can maybe just play the move h6 here, and for example bishop h4 and castles. Supposedly there's not going to be like any serious issues here. Bishop c6 and bc6 we're going to be quite okay with. For example, knight b3, and we can either like go for d5 and like e5, knight e8, trying to reroute the knight to c7, try to go for c5, and overall it's quite reasonable. We're going to get a lot of play there with like even pushing the pawns forward. And that's basically going to be it from me in this video. Please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Please do comment if you have any questions, or if you have any suggestions for the lines mentioned in this video. So yeah, don't forget to follow my other socials. I also stream on Twitch. And stay safe and have fun playing chess, everyone. Bye bye.